morning to all who are joining. Happy Friday. We will get started in just a few minutes after we allow for some time to everybody to jump on here. Can you guys still hear me okay?
We can hear you, but it's still a blank screen.
Yeah, okay. When I hit the button to share, it kind of went crazy on me, so I'm trying to bring that back. Is my face frozen too, or are you guys enjoying my faces of confusion right now?
The second one.
Nice.
Yeah, let's give it another 5 minutes for people to trickle in, but I appreciate everyone popping in on time.
Yes.
And guess what? Wait, Graham, Jeff, where are you guys located? I think we gave you. You guys can unmute. Can you guys hear us? Okay.
I hear you. Okay. Hey, look, things are moving. All right.
Cool. We got a couple more joining, Harvey.
Okay.
So let's give it another minute or two.
All right. Can you see my screen at this point, or is it still blank?
We can see it.
Okay. All right. I guess it just went out to lunch for a little bit and came back.
Hey, morning, Kevin. Morning, Louise. Welcome, welcome. Yes, we'll be starting here in a few minutes. We're just waiting for a few more to jump on. Hey, Kevin, I see you finally can get off mute. That's awesome. Where you located, Kevin?
I'm in Toronto. Oh, Ajax, I guess. Can you hear me?
It's a little muffled.
Hi, do you know if there's a way we can access this recording later on?
Yeah, we actually, so a couple ways. We can get you a link to it, but I'll actually be posting it as well on our YouTube channel, I'm told. So that should be fun.
Just remember to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Wait, let me do one of these. It'll be right here.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Oh my gosh.
That was funny, guys. Thank you.
Yeah, no
Joke
problem.
aside, we have a YouTube channel, and they also XenTegra also does a podcast that you definitely should join as well. So a lot of amazing things that we're doing.
Okay, I got my earpiece in now. How does it sound?
Yep, we can hear you much better, Kevin.
Paul, that made me feel real gimmicky.
Anything on a Friday.
I feel dirty.
Like and subscribe. Let's get started in a minute, if you want, Harvey. Interest of time.
Sure. Let me make sure I have control again. Perfect. All right. Happy Fridays, everybody joining. We definitely appreciate you being here. We are, well, I'll go through it really quick. I'm Harvey Green, one of the XenTegra solutions architects, and also lead the XenTegra Gov organization that's for state and local government, as well as education and federal. So I wear a lot of hats. I do a lot of things, but one of the things that I do and make sure that I jump on and do every month is one of these workshops around Nutanix. As Paul kind of talked about a couple minutes ago, we also do a podcast that I'm a co-host on. So I talk a lot of Nutanix. I've got some people on with me as well, as you guys can see, and I'll start with Paul. Paul, you go ahead and introduce yourself to the people, sir.
Yep, thank you very kindly. So again, my name is Paul Nguyen, Senior SE with Nutanix. I'm currently based out of Northern Virginia, and I've been here 4+ amazing years at Nutanix, working alongside Harvey Green and the amazing partnership we have with XenTegra. And we also have 2 SMEs with us today. Todd and Mike, if you guys want to do a quick intro.
Sure. Hi. Hey, good morning, everybody. I think it's still morning. Yep. My name is Todd Hurrell. I've been with Nutanix coming up on 3 years come this December. I am a Nutanix database service specialist called NDB. And looking forward to talking NDB to you guys today, and welcome to the bootcamp.
Well, hey, my name's Mike Matthews. I am a database dude. So I've been working with Microsoft SQL Server for more years than I care to admit. I've been in the trenches as a production DBA. I've been a database developer as well as a SQL Server SME for a couple different vendors, not just Nutanix. So I got a pretty diverse background when it comes to databases. And now at Nutanix, I help customers simplify running databases on our platform. And I'm really excited to talk more about NDB with you guys today.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, guys. I am going to jump in. Whoops, there we go. Jump in. We've done introductions. I'll do a little bit about who is XenTegra so that you guys who are new to us know who we are and what we offer and why in the world we are doing this free workshop on a Friday. So let's jump into that. First things first, our 2023 Bronco Giveaway is live. If that doesn't get your attention for those of us who are new, we are giving away a 2023 Bronco. We've set up the link at bronco.xentegra.com for you to go out there and register for. And we gave away one in 2022. I believe that was May-ish, May or June that we gave away that one. We are doing the same thing for 2023. So yes, it is real. Yes, you do have a chance to win one. Yes, we're putting it out there, right? So definitely go out to bronco.xentegra.com and sign up. Let's get to who is XenTegra. So for those of you who haven't heard of XenTegra, we are a value-added reseller for multiple technologies, one of which is Nutanix, who you're on to listen to today. And we do a lot for our customers in terms of making sure that they get educated. And the big deal behind that, right, is because we believe that educated customers make the best decisions. There's no way that you can make, well, I shouldn't say no way, a broken clock is right twice a day. You can end up accidentally making the right decision, but we find that it's better odds for you if you're educated, you know about the technologies, and you can actually point to the reason why you made the decisions and make the right decisions for your environment and your business. So lots that we do around that. We talked through a couple of those. We'll get to a few more, but we do workshops like this. We do a Nutanix one every month, as I kind of talked about. We do it for a bunch of different technologies as well. We also have consulting services so that, when you do have a project that you want to get completed, we've got experts around our side that can help with both implementation for something new for you and optimization of something you already have. We do managed services as well, so that, as the care and feeding is needed in the environment, if you don't have the staff for that, or don't have the time for that, or don't have the desire really to take care of the environment like that, we've got managed services that we can offer to you. We also do complimentary assessments, which we call micro assessments, where we jump into your environment, kind of shoulder surf with you, and ask you a couple questions. I say a couple, it's probably 100 or so that we are filling out for you, but you work with one of our solutions architects for up to about 4 hours. We go through the environment with you and return to you an actual deliverable of what we found, what we recommend for the environment to either optimize it or make it more secure or make it more up to date. We do that completely free for you, and would love to help get you to where you want to go, or just give you kind of a blueprint set of recommendations to help you do that. So up in the top right is a picture of our founder and CEO for XenTegra. That is Mr. Andy Whiteside. And at a very basic level, he says the XenTegra business model is simple here: build a community and then create solutions that serve that community. And so that's what we look to do all the time, is make sure that we're bringing everybody around each other, discuss our recommendations. You guys get to discuss your recommendations, and then we, come to a solution, right? A smart one. We've got a team of people. It's incredible when I look at this every single time. We counted up the years of experience of end user compute on our team. We all thought it was going to be, 300 or 400. We're trying to guess the jelly beans in the jar. It was 716, and that was last year when we did that. It's actually way more now because we've grown and hired some people, so that number has only gone up from there. But long story short, we've got a lot of people here that are fully invested, fully skilled, that will, help you get from where you are to where you want to go. Another quote here out of our founder and CEO: XenTegra was born out of a need for customer enablement and true partnership. We are not the type of firm who will sell you something and say, all right, see you in 3 years when it's time to renew. We definitely are, working with you through what you're going through. We are, we do our best to become an end-to-end trusted advisor for you, so that we're not, that person that just shows up when it's time to buy something or time to renew. We like to have continual conversation and make sure that we're all building towards achieving your goals as a business. For that approach, we've won a bunch of different awards. This one in particular is when we won Partner of the Year for Citrix. This was a couple years ago. We've won that award a few times. We've won it for IGEL. We're still working on that one for Nutanix.
It's coming. It's coming.
All right. But vendor awards like that are great. The one that we're most concerned about is making sure that we're partner of the year for all of our customers. So that's what we focus on the most. We just happen to get some recognition in the middle, in between time for some of those. So events.XenTegra.com is the site that you can go to see all of the things that we have going on. We do a whole lot for our customers, as I've kind of already talked about. But just to give you a preview of what you'll see when you go to events.XenTegra.com, we've got some things that are virtual, like we're doing today. We've got things that are on site, hopefully in around the city or area that you're in. And those things can range from something really technical, like a workshop that we're doing like this, or it could be a baseball game, a soccer game. I think we've got axe throwing and bourbon tasting and all kinds of different things. So different events that we can bring everybody around, again, creating a community and making sure that we're doing our best to service that community as well. So check out events.XenTegra.com. All of those things will be completely free for you to participate in. And hopefully you'll be able to jump in and do, more than one. So we absolutely encourage you to do that so that we just don't end up, at a baseball game watching by ourselves with 20 seats blank. Webinars.XenTegra.com is where we host a list of the webinars that we do. We do at least one of these, sometimes a couple of these every Wednesday. So we do webinar Wednesdays. These are normally a much shorter, condensed version of what's going on today. It's about 45 minutes each time, discussing a new technology with one of our vendor partners. And we definitely encourage you to go out to get some additional information on those. Podcast.XenTegra.com, kind of talked about a little bit. We have a Nutanix weekly podcast that we do weekly, that I'm one of the co-hosts for. We also have at this point, I think we're up to 10 different podcasts at this point, maybe 11. I know we just added one for AWS not long ago. So, we've got them across different technologies. I want to make sure that, you guys have the option to check those out. I think the last Nutanix podcast was number 59. So we've been doing a lot of these and have been doing them for a while. So definitely go out there to take a look. We appreciate any, subscribe or likes or that you want to put out there. And we appreciate any feedback. We've got a diverse customer base here. And, really the big deal around this slide is to make sure that everybody here understands that, we've taken our approach and our knowledge and applied it across a bunch of different technology verticals, a bunch of different customers. You'll see on here, healthcare, you'll see TV channels, you'll see, power companies, institutes of higher learning, tire maker, right? All of those things, are completely different, but at the same time, they have lots of things in common, lots of goals in common, and we can take our approach and apply it to any customer, big or small, and we'll make sure that we are crafting a solution that fits your environment and your situation. Again, we're a reseller. We do professional services, we do managed services, we even do hosting services out of 2 data centers we have, one east side, one west side of the country. And we're very, very solutions oriented. So, don't be afraid to come to us with not just, hey, I want to buy this particular thing. You can come to us with ideas or concepts, right? I have this problem for my end users that I want to solve. I want people to be able to, work remotely, or I've been told that I have to move, half of my data center to the cloud for next year. How in the world can I do that? We can take those, big questions and help you answer them. So got the skills and the services, consulting, that can help you do that. So again, we do a lot around a bunch of our different vendor types. This is, again, an illustration of how deep we can go. with solutions, with services, being a reseller. Really, the big thing is the one at the bottom here. Multiple solutions. There are multiple ways that you can do things, but we can be your single vendor, your single point of contact to make all of those things happen. We've got the Nutanix team here with us today. They've got plenty of knowledge. They have lots of things that they can go through and show you everything about Nutanix. And when we go through, for your particular environment, if you're using some other sort of technology that you want to pair with Nutanix, they'll probably have some experience beyond that. But once you add 3, 4, 5, 6 things, right, that's not what they're here for. And when you need somebody to help you put all of those puzzle pieces together, that's what we do, and that's what we're here for. Listing of our cloud partners here. You can see Nutanix, the top of the list. We do a lot with Citrix, VMware, Microsoft, AWS, GCP. So we've got a lot going on at all times, a lot of skill sets across a bunch of different technologies. Partners.XenTegra.com is where you can go to take a look at all of those technologies that we partner with. If you go to partners.XenTegra.com and you see the logo or the name of one of the vendor partners that you work with today, and you don't have somebody to help you enhance that relationship or enhance what that software or that hardware is doing for you, definitely give us a call. We will definitely be able to help you out and help move you further than where you are today. Very much our goal, very much your goal. So let's accomplish it together. XenTegra Connect is our managed hosted solutions division. We also have a 24/7, 365 support desk based out of Alpharetta, Georgia, which is right outside of Atlanta for those of you who aren't familiar. But we've got engineers spread across the country and follow the sun. All of them are in the US, and we have them all the way out to there. Yes, we've got a guy in Hawaii to make sure that we've got you covered on the late night stuff. So definitely got you covered from a 24/7, 365 standpoint. Definitely give us a call if that's something that you're looking for. We do also have a staffing division. So XenTegra Staffing will actually source jobs for you. If you are a job seeker, jobs.XenTegra.com is where we have our jobs that are out there. If you are somebody who needs to hire, then we will try to source an applicant for you or source somebody to fill that position for you as well. You can work with your XenTegra CE, our client executive, or you can just email me, right? We're on the call today. If you guys have something, just let me know. We'll definitely get you connected with our staffing division and try to assess your needs and make sure that we can fill them for you. So again, jobs.XenTegra.com is a place where you can go and see what we have out there today. But if you are trying to fill a position, definitely get in contact with us and we can help with that as well. We talked a little bit about the free assessments already, the micro assessments that go across a bunch of different technologies. Again, this is to make sure that you've got a free offering, kind of a health check that you can use to take a look at your environment and make sure that things are running optimally. And if not, then you'll get back a list of recommendations that we would put out there to try to get you to an optimal state, a best practices state. You can take that, ball it up and throw it away if you want. Or you can say, you know what, I like this list, let's go and, our team will go and take care of it. That's great. Or if you say, you guys, hey, I like your list. I think these things are important. I don't have time for this. You come do it. All right, we will do that too. So no issues with that. You got plenty of options when it comes to that. So if you want us to take a look at your environment, give you some recommendations, you can definitely sign up for one of those. Again, our calls to action here, we can help you plan for what's coming in the future. We can put together quotes for you if you are looking to purchase something, if you are looking to, have a demo, have, something like a workshop like we're doing today. We can organize those for you. And if you just want us to take the keyboard and mouse and do it for you, we've got services to do that as well. So we try to be end to end and make sure that we make it as easy for you as possible. And hopefully, you know, that covers that for you. If not, definitely let me know what else we can do to make that easy for you. And you know, we'll work on trying to put together offerings around that. That is what I have around XenTegra. If anybody has any questions, feel free to stick them in the chat, or I've given you all the ability to come off mute. And if you want to ask questions, you can do that. That will be there actually for the rest of the workshop and subsequent lab for today that you guys will be working on hands-on. So again, definitely feel free to do that. We're going to try to keep this interactive, make sure you can ask the questions that you want to ask. And that's sort of my time for today right now. So we're gonna move through. I'm gonna take my screen away. And then Mr. Todd, if you're sharing, would you go ahead and bring your screen up? And you should be able to share it out at this point. Let's see.
Yeah, I think I'll be the one
I
sharing.
think that'll be Mike. Yep.
Ah, Mike, yes. All right, it'll be the database dude.
Database dude, exactly. Exactly.
So yeah, and while Mike's talking, guys, I will be actually working on sending you out some credentials and instructions to get into the lab today. So be on the lookout for that in your email. We also have, as we've talked about, some people here with me that will be able to help, you know, answer questions or get your questions answered while we're here today. So again, don't be afraid to come off mute or type an answer in the Q&A or the chat, and we'll be on the lookout for those and make sure that you get questions answered today. Again, this is for you, right? We're not here to just say a whole bunch of stuff. We're here to help educate you. So definitely get what you want out of this. And I'll step back. Mr. Database Dude, you go ahead and educate us.
All right. All right. Can everyone see my screen? Okay, you should see an Era/NDB overview slide. I see a thumbs up from Todd. Outstanding.
I can see it.
Well, one of the great things about my job here at Nutanix is I get to help people with their databases. And there are a lot of different challenges that I hear from customers that I talk to. You know, some customers are looking for ways to do more with less. You know, our workload seems to keep increasing, and oftentimes there's just not enough resources to keep up with the workload. So being able to operate more efficiently is a big benefit. Other customers are looking for ways to provide better service to their application teams, be able to turn around new environments, copies of databases much more quickly, so that they get that database as a service experience that they need to become efficient. And other customers are looking for standardization. You know, they want to know that every time they spin up a new environment, it's done in a consistent way, regardless of who's doing it. And that standardization goes with keeping things patched as well. They want to know for a given version of a database engine that they're caught up on their patching to help reduce their security risk. And the great thing is the Nutanix database platform helps address all of those challenges and more. So today I'll just provide a brief overview of NDB. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. I want to spend most of our time with the lab exercises, but I think it gives a little more context to the lab exercises if I start there. Then I'll provide a few details about the lab environment that you'll be able to use today. And then I'll help everybody get connected. I'll lead you through the first section of the lab guide, and then we can decide whether you want me to lead you through the rest of the lab exercises, or if you'd rather I just be quiet and let you proceed on your own. So with that, let's start taking a look at the Nutanix database platform. And it starts with the Nutanix hyper-converged infrastructure. And this is a highly resilient virtualized platform that provides great performance and works really great for databases. It is very easy to scale, whether you need to scale up to meet a larger workload or scale out to be able to accommodate additional workloads. Just a fantastic platform. It's a clustered solution using x86 servers that are connected together using standard Ethernet. Could be 10 gig, could be 25 gig, or even 100 gig, depending on the performance requirements. On each node of the cluster, there's a special user mode virtual machine called the controller VM, or CVM for short. And the CVMs all work together to build a single storage pool using the disks installed in each node of the cluster. And we call that the distributed storage fabric, or DSF. It completely eliminates the need for any sort of storage device. So you'll notice in this architecture diagram, there's no storage fabric and there's no SAN because you don't need one. The distributed storage fabric distributes your data and metadata across all the nodes in the cluster in a truly distributed fashion. So you don't get hotspots and you don't get single points of failure. Now, even though there's no SAN involved, you still get those enterprise-grade storage features that work great for databases, things like encryption at rest, compression, and snapshots. And it's snapshots that NDB really takes advantage of. But when you use snapshots with databases, you really need to do it in a database-aware way, and that's exactly what NDB does. So now that you have the automation provided by the features of NDB with the efficiencies of snapshots, now you can become a lot more efficient as you manage your databases. Now, one thing I should mention, you'll notice that the slide says Era, and I crossed it out to put NDB. We're in the process of rebranding this offering, and even our software still says Era, but if you go out to our website, you'll see a mix of references to Era and NDB. I just want to assure you that it's the same thing. It doesn't matter what you call it. It's not a different version or different feature set when we talk about NDB. It's purely rebranding. We have a new release coming out in a few weeks, and the software itself will be branded NDB. And after that point, you shouldn't see too many, if any, references to Era after that. So NDB itself is implemented as a virtual appliance that runs on Nutanix, and it provides a set of simplified yet powerful database operations that can be used to manage databases running on the NDB platform. And it doesn't matter which hypervisor you like to use. You can use our hypervisor, which is AHV, or you can use ESXi. NDB works with either one. These operations work roughly the same way across multiple database engines. So if you're using popular proprietary engines like Oracle and SQL Server, NDB works with either of those. We also work with the popular open source engines like Postgres and MySQL, and it's that single pane of glass across all those database engines. So you don't have an interface for Oracle and then a different interface for SQL Server and a different interface for Postgres. It's one interface for all of them. Now in the lab exercises today, we're going to be focusing on SQL Server. But just remember that simplicity that you're going to see and feel, that works with the other database engines as well. There are three different ways to leverage NDB and the operations that it provides. So in the lab exercises today, we'll be using the GUI. That's the most common way to perform these operations interactively. But we also have a command line interface, which is just another way for you to interactively perform these database operations. But I think one of the big value adds with NDB is the REST API. That provides programmatic access to these operations and makes it really easy to automate the database portion of your workflows. I think that's also important as you start to manage databases at scale. It's really difficult to do that well if you don't embrace at least some form of automation. Could be simple PowerShell scripts in a SQL Server environment, could be Python scripts in an Oracle environment. Regardless of how much automation you embrace in your environment, those scripts, those workflows and tools like Ansible or Nutanix Calm, they all become much easier to create and maintain because the database portion just requires a lot less code. Now, these operations fall into 4 different categories or use cases. And you see 2 on the left of the screen and 2 on the right. And we're going to touch all of them in the lab exercises today. You'll see how you can streamline provisioning operations with NDB. We make it really easy to spin up new database environments. I talk to a lot of customers where they have to wait days or even weeks to get new database environments spun up. With NDB, less than an hour, you can have a new database environment created, and that could be a highly available environment as well. So if you want to use an Oracle RAC cluster or a SQL Server availability group, you still get that efficiency when provisioning those environments. From a lifecycle management perspective, we're primarily talking about patching. We make it really easy to stay caught up on patching, and you'll see that as we patch SQL Server databases today. You can handle keeping apps updated on your phone. You can handle keeping the database engine patched. It's especially important in the security climate that we live in today. One of the best defenses against a security incident is just to stay caught up on patching, and NDB helps you do that. Now, the use cases on the right, database protection and copy data management, those are the use cases that make heavy use of snapshots. And that's because there's some significant time and space efficiencies involved when you use snapshots. I can create a snapshot backup of a database, even if it's terabytes in size, in just a few minutes. And that's because a snapshot backup is simply a metadata operation. We freeze the blocks that have changed since the last snapshot, and that's all we have to do. We don't have to move a lot of data around. If you think about a native backup of, say, a 5 terabyte database, we have to read 5 terabytes of data out of the database and then write it somewhere. You don't have to do that with a snapshot backup. You also get that same level of efficiency when it comes to performing a restore from that snapshot backup. We don't have to move 5 terabytes of data around to restore a 5 terabyte database. We simply spin up a new set of disks using the block map of the snapshot, and we can recover the database directly from those new disks. Now, that speed of restore really helps as you manage copies of databases. Very common to have many copies of databases. We've seen studies where it's not unusual to have 10 copies or more of the same production database across your data centers. We make it very fast to create these copies and very fast to refresh them. That's another challenge as you manage copies of data. Not only do you have to perform that lengthy restore the first time, but those copies get stale very quickly. And so having a mechanism like what we have through NDB allows you to keep them refreshed so you can maximize the value of those copies. And there's also some space savings involved when you manage copies this way. I can clone a 5 terabyte database without burning 5 terabytes of disk space. If I need to do that 10 times, I don't burn 50 terabytes of disk space. So there's some significant time and space savings when you're leveraging NDB for creating copies. And you'll see that in the lab exercises today, where you'll be creating a copy of a database as well as refreshing that copy. So I thought I'd pause just for a second and see if there's any questions. All right, I've got just a few more slides. I want to just touch on a few high-level concepts, and then we'll be ready to jump into the labs. So one of the core constructs within NDB that you'll see is something called a time machine. And this is the mechanism that NDB uses to build a timeline to protect and to create copies of your databases. Every time machine has an SLA and a schedule, and that's how NDB knows when to create snapshots, when to collect log information, and how long to retain them. Now, whenever we create a snapshot, we're using native APIs to get what we call an application consistent snapshot, because it's important to create that snapshot in a way that's compatible with the database. So when we use SQL Server, or when we create snapshots of SQL Server in the lab today, we'll be using volume shadow copy services, or VSS, pretty common way to leverage snapshots with SQL Server. If you were to use NDB with Oracle, we'd use RMAN and put the database in hot backup mode, snap the disk, and then pull it out of hot backup mode. Now, because the time machine can be configured to collect log information, we provide point-in-time recovery down to the second. And this is really important because a lot of snapshot-based solutions don't give you that. Very fast and easy to recover the database to the point in time of a snapshot, but you may not be able to recover to points in time in between snapshots. But with NDB, you absolutely can. Now, whenever you provision a database with NDB, creating a time machine is part of that workflow. But if you already have existing databases running on Nutanix, you can simply register those databases with NDB, create a time machine during the registration workflow, and from that point on, NDB will allow you to protect and clone your existing databases from that point on. NDB is also multi-cluster aware, and the type of cluster I'm talking about here is a Nutanix cluster. So from a single management interface, you can manage databases across your entire data center, regardless of which Nutanix cluster that database actually lives on. So you can create clones across clusters. I can provision my databases on any cluster that's registered with NDB, as well as protect and patch those databases. And those clusters don't all have to be on-prem. So today we support running Nutanix clusters on bare metal and AWS. We'll have that same capability here by the end of the year for Azure. So if you're looking for that single management plane in a hybrid fashion, look no further than NDB. You'll be able to manage your databases on any Nutanix cluster, whether it's on-prem or in the public cloud. And since we'll be doing a lot with SQL Server today, I wanted to highlight this use case as well. Because NDB is multi-cluster aware, this allows you to provision SQL Server availability groups and place replicas on different Nutanix clusters that could even be in different regions or in the public cloud. So now you're able to not only provision a highly available database in your primary data center, but you can provision an availability group to meet not only your HA requirements, but your DR requirements as well. And with that, that's just a high-level overview of NDB. Any questions before we proceed? All right, I must be answering everybody's question as I go. This is awesome.
Doing
All
a
right,
great job.
So one of the things I found as I've done these workshops in the past is to provide a little context on our lab environment and talk a little bit about the lab guide. I think it just makes it a little easier to go through the exercises. So we have a couple Nutanix clusters available, and Harvey's going to assign each of you to use one of these clusters. And we have a pretty consistent IP scheme for all of the interfaces that you'll need to use. So Prism Element is the basic management interface for the Nutanix cluster itself. And we will always have that be .37. Prism Central is a way to manage multiple Nutanix clusters in the same interface. And so we've got that installed in the lab environment as well. That will always be .39. And the Era or NDB GUI will always be accessible at .22. And just to help with keeping that consistent scheme, if you're on cluster 31, the third octet's always going to be 31. If you're on cluster 83, the third octet will be 83. So if you're looking to go to the Era interface on cluster 31, it's just going to be 10.55.31.22. So it should make it pretty easy for you to find where these interfaces are. And when we all get connected together, I'll have you connect to each of these just so you see the process. This is a shared environment. And so we're not all on the same cluster, and we all have different user IDs that have been assigned, and Harvey's going to send those out to you. In the lab guide, you'll see references to user ##, and the idea is that you replace the pound signs with your user number. Now, when I lead you through the first section of the lab guide, I'll be user 19. So all throughout, as I'm naming databases and I'm naming VMs, I'll be using, tagging all of my objects with user 19. And you'll want to do the same. So if you're user 1, tag it with 1. If you're user 3, tag it with 3. Now, from a credentials perspective, it's pretty straightforward how we connect to everything. And I always like to share this in past workshops. When I haven't done this, I get a lot of questions about what are the credentials to connect to things. Now, it is in the lab guide, but I think it's just good at a high level to understand the scheme we're using. So for all of the Nutanix interfaces, Prism Central, Prism Element, and NDB, you're going to use the admin user with the NX2 tech password. Now, if the NX2 tech password doesn't make sense to you, it could be that Harvey hasn't sent you your credentials yet, but it will be NX2 tech, a number, and then the exclamation point. And so the password for everybody using cluster 31 will be NX2 tech 424 exclamation point. And for anyone using cluster 83, it'll be NX2 tech 036 exclamation point. And you'll always use those credentials when connecting to Prism Element, Prism Central, and NDB. Now, you will have to remote desktop into a few VMs, and you'll either be doing that connecting as the local administrator or the domain administrator. And there's a subtle difference between the passwords. It's always going to be Nutanix/4u, but the local administrator uses a capital N and the domain administrator uses a lowercase n. And unfortunately, there's a section in the lab guide where the password is wrong. I'll point that out in another slide. But whenever you're connecting as an administrator, it's going to be Nutanix/4u. If you're using lowercase n and it's not working, try uppercase and vice versa. And then whenever we connect with SQL Server Management Studio, we'll just use Windows authentication. You'll be in a remote desktop session, and that will give you admin rights into the server that you're connecting to. All right, so there's a couple of notes that I wanted to mention, a couple of, we'll call them errors in the lab guide. And I mentioned about a password problem. There'll be a time where we need to remote desktop into a VM to delete a table, and it'll tell you to connect as a local administrator, but it gives you the wrong password. And that's just, you see, it's a lowercase n. All we want to do is use the appropriate password, and then you'll get right in. We also have a patching exercise, and part of that patching exercise will be to upload a cumulative update file. The instructions in the lab guide have you specify a URL to go get that file. And what we found is that this process will inject a special character into the file name, and NDB in its current version has some problems handling that file name. And what will end up happening if you were to do this is you'll be able to create a profile version just fine, but when you go to apply the patch, it'll fail, saying it couldn't push the file to the VM. And so what we're going to do together when we get connected through to your virtual desktop session is we'll download the cumulative update file from Microsoft. And this is actually what you would do in a real world scenario. Microsoft will release a new cumulative update, and you'll go to their website and download it. And that's what you'll use to create the new software profile version. And so we'll go through that together, so you don't have to memorize that, but that is the link. It's in the lab guide as well. But we'll go through and download it all together. And so with that, we're ready to get started. And so Harvey, have you doled out credentials to everyone?
I have sent out credentials to everyone, and for the first few, I had a little bit of a typo, so I've even sent out the correction for those.
Okay.
So hopefully that was the only mistake that I made, and everything's all great and ready for you to show them what's going on in the lab.
Awesome, awesome.
So if everybody can jump out to make sure both that you can get to the lab instructions, which is the first link in the email. We want to make sure that you can get to those. And for the second piece, getting logged in there, if you're having any issue getting connected there, please let us know so that we can take care of that first. And that way, the rest of this won't be a waste of your time.
So when you click on that lab guide link, this is where that should take you. So if anybody is having trouble getting to the lab guide, we certainly want to get that fixed. So I'm actually going to have the lab guide off screen because I want you to see what I'm actually doing as we go through these exercises. So to connect to your VDI session, you'll want to click on the link for frame, and it's just that https console.nutanix.com/x/labs, and this is what the login screen looks like. Now I'm going to use cluster 31. That may or may not be the same cluster that you've been assigned to, but the username scheme is pretty simple. It's just the cluster name. So DM3-PLC 031. In my case, it'll be 083 for those of you on the other cluster, dash user, and then your user number. So I'm user 19. So that's what I'm going to use. And then the password. Harvey, that should be in the email you received. And for cluster 31, it is NX2 Tech 424. The number is 036 if you're on the other cluster. And this is what you should type for the password. And so when I was talking about connecting to Prism Element, Prism Central, and NDB, that's the password you'll be using. And we just click sign in. And then accept the terms of service. And then you'll want to click on the desktop icon, and that will bring you into your VDI session that will give you access to the lab environment.
All right, 1 second. I have one so far. Oh, nice. And I'm getting that now too. So the link for the lab instructions is now giving us invalid magic link. So,
All right.
well, please let me figure that out.
Let me try posting it to the chat.
Yeah,
It's kind of it's a long, ugly link, unfortunately. I wish it were
is.
shorter. They do expire, so if that magic link was created a while ago, that might be why.
It was, well, 2 days ago. It's not too bad.
Yeah, I can't remember how long they last, but I just created a new one and posted it in the chat. So if you're having trouble getting access to the lab guide, try that link in the chat.
Hey, Mike, it shows the chat's disabled, so I don't see anything in the chat.
Wow.
That's interesting too.
Oh, yep. It just says hosts and
Hang on.
panelists, which won't do you
All
any
right,
good.
how about that? All right, let's post that again, Mike. Let's see if
Okay.
it goes out to everyone this time.
There we go.
Now we got it.
All
Perfect.
right, perfect.
Thanks for letting me know.
Yes, thank you for that. All right, so look, they are paying attention.
It was done by design. Yeah, the magic link, guys, you have to copy and paste it into Google Chrome or Firefox, whatever you're using. For some reason, if you just click on it, it doesn't copy the whole thing. So yeah, use the link that Mike Matthews just put in the chat and just copy paste the whole entire long link. And let us know if it's not working. Everyone got in okay with the link? Should give you a registered page, put in your name and email and company you work for, and you should get into the lab guide. Cool. Yeah, I just saw, Jack, I just saw your question on the Q&A. Yeah, the link you saw, you see how it got cut off right in the middle.
All right, so Jack is good. Is everybody else to the point where they have the lab guide up? And if so, then let's get to the point we see here on the screen here to make sure that you're in your desktop. And again, you can stick something in Q&A or in chat to let us know you're there. All right, perfect, Graham, thank you. And you guys also, again, have the ability to come off mute if you want. Don't have credentials to log in. Oh yeah, Brian, I left you off. Hold please. I purposely do the at Nutanix.com last, but last didn't mean never at all. So just give me a sec.
And Brian, if you're VPN'd in, you can actually skip the frame part if you want, but
Got it. Okay.
Making them all fancy now.
Yeah, we get direct access.
Yeah.
But once you're in the VDI, right, you use basically in a host server, so it's directly connected as well. Shameful plug, Nutanix Frame, you're actually using a Nutanix VDI product. Sorry, shameless plug.
Paul, you got to make sure they're all in and it's working first.
Oh man, you guys all got in. But we work with every every major VDI. Citrix Xen, right, just announced that we're their preferred platform of choice. That's very huge because Citrix doesn't really announce those kind of things. We also announced again that they're our preferred VDI. So another quick shameless plug, XenTegra is a huge Citrix Xen partner. So it's the perfect marriage, right, with Nutanix and XenTegra. So you guys are in the right hands in the right boot camp for this.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So Brian, you should have yours now. Graham, did you try the link in the chat that Mike posted?
Yeah, copy and paste the whole thing and not just clicking on it. Again, for some reason, if you click on it, it just cuts out in half.
Yeah,
copy the whole link in
weird.
chat.
Yeah.
It's a magic link. Magic. Yeah.
Tragic.
Tragic. Copy and paste the whole link into Google Chrome or Firefox. I've seen it work best in Google Chrome.
if it was really magic, it seems like you could click on it.
You know, we might have the wrong definition of magic.
Yeah, let me know, Graham, if that works.
No. All right. So, Graham, let me try to send it to you by email again. And let's see if that works. All right, if that doesn't work, let me know. You should be able, like Paul said, to just copy and paste it into the browser and see whether or not that gets you where you need to be. I cannot seem to copy it. All right.
Oh,
That's
okay.
another
Email them.
issue. Yeah, I just emailed it.
Okay. Yeah, so certain customers are having issues copying from our Zoom chat. I don't know why.
Much better. Perfect.
Okay, perfect.
All right.
We're in. We're good.
Everyone else doing okay?
Yeah, sorry for that confusing, Graham.
Awesome, Brian's in, perfect. All right, so from our desktop, let's just get connected to the Nutanix interfaces. And so we'll just open up Chrome, just click on the Chrome icon in the taskbar. And the first thing we'll do is just connect to Prism Element. So that'll be slightly different depending on what cluster you're connecting to. So it's always going to be 10.55, and then for me, it's .31 because I'm on cluster 31. If you're on cluster 83, it'll be .83. And then the last number will be .37. We'll go ahead and click on advanced and proceed. And that'll bring us to the login screen for Prism Element. And we're going to use the admin user and then your NX2 tech password. And that will bring us to the home page in Prism Element. And so this is just the management interface that the more basic one, I guess, that helps you manage a Nutanix cluster. We click on the menu here and click on VM and then go to table. We can see all the VMs running on this cluster. Here's our Era server. This is how we'll be connecting to the GUI. And if we hover over the IP address, you can see it's .22. So if we open another tab, let's connect to Prism Central. It's 10.55 and then your cluster number .39. And we get the same certificate warning. We'll click on advanced and proceed. And then we'll use admin and our NX2 tech password. And that brings us to the Prism Central dashboard. And from Prism Central, you're able to manage multiple Nutanix clusters in the same interface and then manage those features that work across Nutanix clusters. We want to see the VMs from Prism Central. We click on the stack in the left-hand corner here, expand compute storage, click on VM, a view of all the VMs on this cluster, and here's our Era server that we'll be connecting to next. You can see that it's .22. So let's go ahead and connect to Era. We'll go to 10.55.cluster number .22. And again, click advanced and proceed. And we're going to use admin and our NX2 password to connect to the GUI. And that brings us to the Era dashboard. Was everyone able to connect to Prism Element, Prism Central, and the Era interface?
I am in all three. Good job, Brian.
Perfect.
We call that a hat trick.
All right, so I'm just going to bring up the lab guide, and we're going to be going through the SQL Server track. And so if you look at the menu on the left-hand side, find Era with MS SQL track and click on Configure MS SQL and Era. And that's where we are going to start. And so the first thing it has us do is go look up the IP address of the Era server. And we've already done that. We know it's .22, but all that exercise is doing is bringing you to Prism Central and looking at the IP address of the VM. We've already done that. So we're already connected into Era. And so we can go take a look at some of the setup in this particular Era environment. We'll click on administration. And we can see there's information about the Era service, just kind of confirming the address that we connected to. If you wanted to configure SMTP, you would do that down in this area down here. Some of the other components that are, I call them reusable components. It's just used in a lot of different database operations. One is the SLAs, and this is the retention policy used by the time machine. The 5 you see on the screen, those are the 5 that are installed by default whenever you install Era. So you can have a SLA of none, which you can see has no days in any of the retention buckets. And then we have bronze, brass, silver, and gold, just varying degrees of retention. And really, probably the only bucket that needs much from an explanation standpoint is continuous. Continuous is the time frame in which you're not only creating snapshots, but you're also collecting log information, and that log operation is called log catch-up, and it works a little different for each database engine. So for Oracle, log catch-up goes and grabs a copy of the archive logs. For SQL Server, it actually creates a log backup and imports it into the Era server. So during this continuous time frame, that's what's happening. And during that time window, we can recover the database or clone the database to any point in time down to the second. And then the other 4 buckets, daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, we just have a single snapshot for each of those time frames. Now, the other type of component that is reusable are the profiles. And so when you first go to look at the profiles, you see the software profiles. That we'll be building a software profile for SQL Server, and that's what will be used as the template or gold image so that you get nice, consistent results every time you deploy a new database environment. But we also have compute profiles, which encapsulate the assignment of CPU and memory resources, network profiles, which ensures that the NICs in the VM get the right VLAN, also configuration parameters for the database engine so that the database is configured properly. And this is great if you're managing databases in which you don't really have deep expertise. You can have someone with an Oracle background build the Oracle parameter profiles, and then the person doing the provisioning doesn't have to have that deep Oracle expertise. And for SQL Server, we also have a domain profile, and this helps deal with the classic conflict between DBAs and domain administrators. A lot of times when I was a DBA, I would need to install SQL Server on a new server or VM, and I needed elevated rights to get it added to the domain. Domain administrator wasn't too excited about giving me those rights, and this helps bridge that gap where the domain administrator can come in and build the domain profile, put credentials in there that allows the person performing the provisioning operations to add computers to the domain without actually having those credentials directly. So it just helps with that. Okay, Jack, it looks like you're having trouble logging in. For you, you should be logging in as admin, and your password is NX2 Tech. Yep, there it is right there.
Yeah, Jack, are you getting to the page to log in? Link issue. The
Are
link-
you using that within the VDI?
Yes.
In the
Are
frame?
you? Yeah, you have to be in the VDI for that.
Yep.
In the frame window. So the desktop that you launched.
Yeah, make sure you launch Chrome from inside the VDI.
Yep.
And Mike, can you highlight the clipboard at the bottom just to make sure to show that it's synced for them to see?
Yeah, this right here.
Yeah. Just make sure, you guys, that's the sync clipboard so you can copy and paste into VDI frame.
Yep. We don't have a lot of cutting and pasting to do, but yes, you do want that.
Just making sure I cover my bases in case.
Yep. If you decide to go through the Oracle exercises on your own, there is an SSH key that you want to paste. That'll be way too painful to type, but we don't have that for the SQL Server exercises.
Yeah, I was going through that lab guide actually, Mike, and it seems I had to select the key instead of hitting the little cut and paste button.
Yeah, I noticed that too.
Yeah, so just a little idiosyncrasy. And hey, I just want to mention to everybody that's doing the lab guides. I know that we are going through the SQL Server portion of it. One thing I failed to mention about myself is that I was an Oracle DBA for a dozen or so years. So if you guys choose to go the Oracle track, which is also included in the lab guide, you can certainly do that as well, either now or maybe after though this lab wraps up, because these labs are around, I think until 11 o'clock tonight. Yep. So if you guys wanted to go through the lab guide and do the Oracle track, feel free. And if you guys have any questions on how anything looks from an Oracle perspective, let me know, and we can certainly walk through that as we go along.
All right, so I think hopefully all the connection issues have been resolved, and we can start actually doing some interesting stuff. And so the first thing we're going to do here is create a software profile, and the very first step of that is to register a VM that has Windows and SQL Server installed on it according to your standards and best practices. And so to register a VM, we're going to click on the menu and go to Database Server VMs and click on List on the left-hand side and click on the Register button. And you can see the registration process is pretty much the same regardless of the database engine. Instead of picking, say, Oracle, we're going to pick SQL Server, and this VM that we'll be using is a standalone. It's not a clustered VM. And then what we'll want to do is choose our source VM from the list. We just click in the list and scroll down until you find your user number. And so for me, I'm user 19, so I'm going to select user 19, and it translates that into an IP address for me. The local administrator account is what we're going to use here. So we'll type /administrator. And then the password is Nutanix/4u with a capital N. And you can click on the masks here and see what you typed. All right, the database server VM screen. So it's kind of in the background of my screen, but in the upper left-hand corner where it says database server VMs, this is actually a menu. Oh, no, you want to be in the Era interface. Sorry. Yeah, we'll be doing this from Era. So if you're not already connected to Era, you want to connect to 10.55. Your cluster number .22, and then enter the admin and your NX2 tech password. In Prism Central, all you'll be able to do is look up the IP address, and then you would use that to connect to the Era interface in another browser window or tab.
Yeah, see in the browser window there that Mike has, put in the the address up there. So you just log into the Era virtual appliance.
And so when you leave the context of the text box you enter the password in, what it will do for SQL Server is look up the instance name. And once the instance name is here, you know you've got the appropriate credentials, and you can just click the register button. But before I do that, I want to highlight the API equivalent button on the left-hand side here. I mentioned that Era, well, maybe I forgot to mention that. Era is an API first application, and that means everything we do in the GUI goes through the API, and we're essentially configuring an API call. And one of the great things about that is it helps ensure everything's in the API, but it also makes it very easy for us to share what the API call looks like. And so if you're interested in automating your database operations, this is a great way to get a jump start on those efforts. And so when you click on that button, you'll see the API call for the operation that you're configuring. We've got a couple different languages that you can see the API call in. And so I'm a PowerShell guy, so this is what I do in my lab environment to look at the API call in PowerShell. Now, if you're writing a Python script, you can just select Python from the list. But an important point here is that we have 5 different language examples of the API call. But that doesn't mean these are the only 5 languages you can use the REST API. Anything that speaks REST can use the API. We just don't provide an example for every single possibility. So I was in a boot camp and someone asked, Well, what about Ansible? Can I use this with Ansible? Absolutely. Ansible has no problems using a REST API. So the operation is ready to go. We'll just go ahead and click on register, and that's going to submit the registration operation.
What cluster is Graham in?
He is on 83. I'm typing that in actually for him right now.
Okay. Perfect.
So the operation is running. There's a few different ways we can take a look and watch the operation. I can just click on this light blue bar at the top here, and we can see .90 is my VM that's being registered. Looks like someone else has got .80 going. And so we can see the various steps. There's not really much happening with the registration operation. It's a pretty basic operation. But any operation that we'll be submitting today, it's the same strategy. We configure it in the GUI, we hit the go button, and we can go into the operation screen and watch its progress. And so this takes a few minutes to actually complete the registration operation. It's adding some metadata inside the Era server, as well as installing the Era worker inside the VM, and that's how Era is able to perform operations within Windows. Yeah, we've got plenty of additional users, so we can
Is Graham trying to launch into Era or his desktop?
Yeah, Graham, what are you trying to
Okay.
lock into?
Yeah, he may be on the other cluster.
Green.
Yeah, I'm on cluster 31, and I think Graham, you're on cluster 83.
Should be.
Yep, so you would have a different IP address than what I'm using. So where I have 31, you'll have 83, and then admin is the user, and the NX2 tech 036 exclamation point password should work.
All right. I like
I like yeah, I like Eureka. There we go. Troubleshooting on the fly. We've got 4 engineers here. Or 5. We also got Brian.
It sounds like the beginning of a joke. How many engineers does it take?
All right, so my registration operation finished. I'll just give .80 a little bit of time to finish as well. But you can see it doesn't take very long, just under 3 minutes for me. And once the VM is registered, now we can use it to build a software profile. And from that profile, later in the exercises, we'll actually go ahead and provision a new database environment. All right, looks like the registration for .80 is complete. So let's go build a software profile. So for that, we go to our menu. We'll click on Profiles. And you're already at software. If we wanted to work with a compute profile, then we pick it from the left side of the screen, but software is where you start. So we'll go ahead and click on Create and then SQL Server. So the profile name, we're going to tag it with our user number. So I'm going to start with user 19. and then MS SQL 2016. You have the ability to have the version itself a different name. I'm going to just leave it at the default, but if you want, this is actually Service Pack 1, just the base of Service Pack 1. You could have the version name be SP1. You also have the ability to add some descriptions. Now we only have one cluster in this environment, so we don't have to pick the Nutanix cluster. And then we just want to scroll down and pick our particular source VM. So I'm user 19. I'm going to grab the user 19 VM. You do have the ability to add the ISO for SQL Server, and we only use that if you want to take advantage of the feature to change the instance name. In this lab exercise, we're not going to need that, so we won't be uploading an ISO, but we do have that capability. So if you're using named instances and you want to change the named instance each time you provision, just make sure you have the ISO and any patch files to match this particular source VM and upload it as part of the profile. And unfortunately, Microsoft doesn't include a rename feature for the instance. So what we do under the hood is we actually uninstall the instance in the profile and install a new one using the ISO. Go ahead and click next. We don't have any notes here to add, but you could add some notes if you had some. Note the API equivalent button. This is present on almost every screen. And then we'll just go ahead and click create. And so last time to watch the operation, I clicked on the light blue bar at the top. We can go ahead and click on the operations link in the upper right-hand corner, and that will bring us to our operation. So we can watch it run. And what we're essentially doing is we're taking this virtual machine and we're creating a snapshot of the disks that contain the operating system and the database software. And that's what we'll use to create new VMs. We'll sysprep that VM to build new database VMs during the provisioning process.
I was just going to mention, Mike, in addition to the API button there, we also expose the entire API library. So if anybody wanted to build anything from scratch, you can certainly do that as well.
Yep. Yeah. In fact, we have an API Explorer built into the GUI. So if you click on the arrow next to the username, you can click REST API Explorer. And you can see all the API calls. So if you want to see the calls related to databases, here where we can get all databases, for example. And that allows you to enter parameters and click try it out, and you can see an example of what that API call looks like. So when I'm automating things in my lab environment, I use a combination of that API equivalent button as well as the API Explorer. Now, a couple other things that we didn't really talk much about creating the VM used for the software profile, but this is the opportunity for you to go in and apply the standards you might have in your environment. Maybe you have specific firewall rules, you have PowerShell commandlets in a SQL Server environment that you want on every single database server that's deployed. Another common thing is whether or not you want SQL Server Management Studio installed on the database VM. I've been in shops where they say no Management Studio on the database server, and other shops where it's on every database server. So if you want it, you just would install it in that VM and build your software profile from that VM, and then it's there every time. And you'll see that in the lab exercises today. When we create that new environment, when we create clones, SQL Server Management Studio will always be there. So the software profile is created. So we're ready for provisioning exercises later in the lab. The next thing we'll want to do is actually register our database. And so we registered the database VM or the instance. Now we want to register the database that's on that VM as well. And so if we go to our menu, and instead of database server VMs like we did before, we're going to choose databases and click on sources. And we're going to click on the register button. Choose the database engine, and this is just a standalone. So we'll just choose database. But if this were an availability group database or a database in a failover cluster instance, we would choose that instead. So one of the things that you can do with NDB is if you register a database, you can register it on a VM that hasn't already been registered. Right? So you can do kind of the register the VM and the database in one step. We chose to break it up. So we'll say we want to register a database on a VM that's already been registered. So we'll just scroll down and choose our source VM. We'll click next. And here we'll choose the database that we want to register. We're going to register the database called SampleDB. Now there's another option up here. We're going to have one database with one time machine, but you do have the ability in SQL Server to group multiple databases together and have them managed as a group with a single time machine. So that means one SLA, one schedule will work across multiple databases. Now in this case, we're going to have just this database in its own time machine. And then we're going to change the name of the database in Era. We're going to tag it with our user number and then call it Lab SQL DB. Now, one important thing is that this name is only going to be seen in Era. It does not change the name of the database inside of SQL Server. We'll go ahead and click Next. It's looking at the recovery model because depending on the recovery model, it will limit the SLAs that you can choose. So if you're running the simple recovery model, it won't let you pick an SLA with continuous in it because you can't take log backups of a database running with the simple recovery model. So we're just going to go ahead and leave everything as a default, but here's where you would pick the SLA, and you can adjust the schedule as well, setting the time of the daily snapshot as well as how many snapshots you want in a day. And we just click register. So that submits the operation. We can use the third method to take a look at the operation and choose operations from the menu. And here's my database that I am registering. Any questions so far? Does it seem pretty easy to use?
Somebody has to have a question. Even if it's what else can it do?
And I know the question some of you might be asking, the cheetah is still the fastest land mammal. So that's a reference to the movie Airplane for those of you that grew up around the same time I did. All right, so that brings us to the end of this section. And so this is a way that you can manage your existing databases. You can register the VM and you can register the database. And once it's been registered, you saw us configure a time machine for that database. And now we get all this great Era functionality for my existing databases. And of course, we'll get that same great functionality for any new databases that we provision as well. All right, so we can kind of go to the next section of the lab guide. And one of the things I always like to do, I'm happy to keep leading everyone through these exercises. If you would rather I be quiet and you just go through on your own, I'm happy to do that. My feelings won't be hurt at all. It's been a mixed bag in workshops I've done in the past. Some folks love it when I go through everything and kind of describe what I'm doing as I'm going through it. And other folks would probably rather I just be quiet. So I'll just throw it out to a vote. If I hear nothing, I'll just keep doing what I'm doing. But I'm happy to just be on standby to answer questions if they come up, if you'd rather just go through the exercises on your own. And of course, you can go ahead of me. You don't have to wait with me either. That's another option.
Graham says, keep going.
Okay, keep going. Well, I'll do that then.
All right, Brian likes it too. So you got 2 votes of confidence there, Mike.
All right, perfect, perfect. Okay, so in the next exercise, we're going to start working with creating snapshots and with creating a clone. So that'll be what we're doing in the next section. So the first thing we're going to do is go into our database VM. So if we look at, we want to find the IP address of our source VM, and there's a couple of different places we can do that. If we go into the data, we just click on our database here. We get this pane with all sorts of information about the database, the time machine, as well as the VM. And one of the things we have is the IP address. Right? So I kind of already knew I was .90, but I wanted to point that out, that it's very easy to find the IP address from within the Era interface. So what we want to do is remote desktop into our source VM. So you just click on the start menu, and I just type the word remote. It finds remote desktop. I just hit return and it brings it up. So I just typed in the IP address 10.55.31.90, but type in the IP address for your source VM, of course. And we'll click connect. And we're going to be logging in as the local administrator. So we'll type administrator, and then it'll be Nutanix for you with a capital N. And we can always validate what we typed by clicking on the eyeball. Looks good. And we'll click OK. Now it's always going to say, do you want to keep going? I always say, don't ask, and yes. And that'll bring us into our source VM. Now what we're going to do is go into SQL Server Management Studio and add a table to our source database. Now, we have Server Manager set up to auto start whenever you log in. If you ever want to change this, and I do this in my lab environment because I don't like looking at it, you can just go under Manage and select that Do Not Start automatically at login. But we'll just want to go ahead and close that just to clean things up. And then we'll double click on the SQL Server Management Studio icon on the upper left-hand side of the screen. Now, I don't know what SQL Server Management Studio does when it starts up, but it always takes a little bit, and it takes even longer when you're delivering a workshop like this and you're waiting for it to start. But this is very normal. This has been on every platform I've ever worked on. So I wish it were faster, but unfortunately we have to wait. All right, so when it comes up, it wants to go in with SQL Server Authentication. We want to switch that to Windows Authentication. And you notice for the server name, it just has a period. That's all we need. When you have a period like that, it just connects to the local instance. And we'll click Connect. So what we're going to do is expand databases. And we see our sample DB. That's the database that we registered. We'll expand sample DB, and we'll expand tables. And we'll see we have just one test table. And what we're going to do is create another table called test lab table. So we're going to right click on the database name and select new query. And you can copy the SQL statement from the lab guide. And I find I have to Control V to paste, but I've also, as Todd mentioned, the copy button doesn't appear to be working. So you might have to copy the statement manually. It's a small enough statement. Oh, there it goes. It worked finally. Just had to be more patient. And so this statement, what it's doing is it's selecting all the rows from the sales.orders table and inserting them into a new table called test lab table. So it creates a table and populates it with the contents of the orders table. So we'll go ahead and run this. And we don't see it in our table list yet, so we have to refresh. And once the refresh is complete, then we'll see our new table.
Hey, Mike, how did you run that? Sorry, I just missed that step.
Oh, sorry. Thank you for saying something. I've run queries so often, I kind of forget that it's just kind of second nature to me. Just click on this execute button here.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep. All right. So my refresh completed, and I now have that test lab table. So I'm going to go ahead and minimize my remote desktop session here and go back to the Era interface. And what we're going to do is create a manual snapshot. And we want to go to the time machine. And there's a variety of different ways you can get there. We can click on the time machine link right here. What the lab guide does is has us go to the databases screen. So I'm just going to effectively hit the back button here. This is that database option. We want to be sure that we've got sources selected. And what we're going to do is just select our database, just the radio button here. And actually, we don't even need to go into the time machine. We can, but for this operation, we can just select it, click database actions, and click snapshot. So this is a way you can create a fallback point anytime you want. And I'll tell you why you might want to do that after I get this submitted. We're just going to tag it with our user. Just call it MSSQL-first-snapshot. We can have this snapshot get removed automatically if we wanted, but in this case, we're not going to do that. Note, we also have an API equivalent. So if you want to automate the process of creating an on-demand snapshot, great way to get started. And we'll go ahead and click create. Now, what we're going to do with this snapshot is create a clone from it. So if someone comes to you and says, hey, I need a copy of the production database the way it looks right now, this is the best way to do it. Go create a manual snapshot and clone from it. And that's what we're going to do in this scenario. But as part of a data protection mechanism, this is a great way to create a fallback point before making a large number of changes. So when I was a DBA, I supported an internet-facing application. And what that means is you don't get a lot of downtime. I got one monthly outage, always on a Saturday night, in which I could make schema changes. Step number one in every outage was to back everything up. That was 2 hours of my Saturday night every month that I lost just waiting for the backup to complete. I would have loved to have had something like Era where I could go create a fallback point in just a couple of minutes. It would have saved me a ton of time. And also think about, what if you have to fall back? If it takes you a couple hours to back everything up, you're in for at least a couple hours of recovery. And so fortunately, I never had to actually use my fallback point because I spent a lot of time testing, making sure that everything went smoothly during the outage, and it always went well. But if I would have had to fall back, I would have spent hours doing that. And with something like NDB, you can create that manual fallback point in just a couple minutes. And then if you actually have to fall back, it just takes a couple minutes to fall back. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this light blue bar and just kind of check out my snapshot. All right, still in the process of creating. Now, these databases admittedly are relatively small, but the great thing is that the operation takes roughly the same amount of time, regardless of how big your database is, right? Because we eliminate data movement as part of creating this snapshot backup. So it's 1.5 minutes here to back up this database. You know, I've used this with terabyte-sized databases, and it's still just around 2 minutes, just like this is. So it's a very time-efficient way to create that fallback point. So now that we have this snapshot, we can go ahead and use it to create a clone. And so what we're going to do is go to look at the time machines. So we'll go to the time machine screen here and click on the time machine for our lab SQL DB. So here's user 19. I'll click on that. And that brings us to the calendar view of our time machine. Now, we just created this time machine, so it doesn't look very much like a calendar. But if I go back to time machine and look at the one I created yesterday, now it's a calendar. Now, there's not a lot on it. It hasn't been running very long, but over time, you start to get more and more color-coded squares on the days on the calendar, and that helps you see very visually to what point you can either restore your database or create a clone. So I'm going to go back to user 19's time machine, and we're going to create a clone from the snapshot that we just created. So we'll go under Actions, click Database, Create Database Clone, and we're going to choose Databases. Now we can clone into an availability group as well. So if that's what you wanted to do, you would select Availability Database, but in this case, we just want Database. On this screen, we're choosing the recovery point. Now, if we had a continuous region set up, we'd be able to use the point in time control and choose the precise hour, minute, and second to which we wanted to clone that database. In this case, we just have snapshots available. So we'll choose our snapshot that we just created. Now, I will say most cloning use cases don't need that point in time recovery. Just cloning from a recent snapshot is usually all you need. So regardless, on this screen, we're choosing our recovery point. We'll click Next. We have the ability to either create a new VM to host the clone or put that clone on an existing server. And that's what we would be doing if we chose Use Authorized Server. Now, the source VM is automatically authorized. If I had, say, a development server, I would have to authorize that server to receive a clone from this time machine, and then I could select it from the list here. But in this case, we're going to create a brand new VM to host this clone. And this is a great strategy for those cases where maybe a developer needs a copy of production to troubleshoot a production issue. They have their own VM that they can go in and do whatever they need to do without impacting anything else. And then once they're done, very easy to get rid of it. So we'll just name this server, start with our user number. We'll tag it with our user, I should say. And we're just going to call this MS-SQL clone 1. Except I'm going to type it right. And this is the name that we'll see in Prism, right? So this is the actual virtual machine name. And if it's less than 15 characters, or I should say 15 characters or less, it'll also be the Windows Server name as well. Now we have the chance to choose a compute profile. This will assign CPU and memory resources to this new VM. We're just going to use the default. And if we hover over the info dot, we can see what that means. 4 vCPUs and 32 gig of memory. So compute profiles are completely customizable. So you can use t-shirt sizes, you can use application type strategies, or something completely different. You set up whatever profiles you want, and that helps promote standardization across your database environment. We'll choose our SQL Server network for the network profile. I can hover over this info dot and see what VLAN. We're on the primary VLAN, which is exactly where we want to be. We're going to give it the local administrator password to use in this new VM. And we can click on these masks to make sure I typed correctly, and I did not. So I can fix that now and not later when I can't figure out why I can't connect. Also, I have the ability to join this new VM to the domain. We're not going to do that in this case. You know, if this were a short-term one-off type thing, maybe it's not worth the effort or worth it to add it to the domain. Just keep it separate. We'll go ahead and click Next. Here's where we'll name the clone, and we're going to tag it with our user. Call it Lab SQLDB Clone 1. And then we also have the ability to change the name of the database inside of SQL Server. And this can be really handy if you want to put multiple clones of the same database on the same instance. So I've talked to customers where they've had challenges with developers tripping on each other. So they want to give every developer their own database. So I could just put a dev01, dev02, dev03, and so on, so that every developer gets their own copy. Now, in this case, I'm going to use a different suffix. We're just going to put clone 1 at the end of it. So the name of the database inside the VM will say clone 1. So it'll be very easy to see that we're actually in the clone and not in the source database. We're not going to use any of the other options. You have the ability to have automatic refreshes for this clone, automatically remove it, as well as use pre and post commands to automate those manual steps that are often associated with getting clones ready to use in their new environment. Maybe you want to adjust permissions, scrub data, change configuration information that's stored in the database. All that can be automated. And again, that same API equivalent button. But once we've got everything set, we can go ahead and click clone, and that'll submit that cloning operation. And it's going to create a brand new virtual machine with a copy of that sample DB database in it. Now, because we're creating a new virtual machine, this operation is going to take a little bit longer. This is going to be a 10 to 15 minute operation. So I'm in Central Time, so 11:46. Those of you on the East Coast, it's 12:46. This would be a great time to get up and stretch your legs, grab a cup of coffee, use the restroom. So why don't we get started again in, I'll just say 9 minutes just to keep the time simple at 55. It'll probably still have a little bit of time left to go, but let's all be back if you're going to step away at 12:55 Eastern. And of course, I'll be here. I'm going to stick around. So if you want to ask questions, tell knock jokes, feel free. All right, I've got 55 after the hour. It looks like perhaps I could have we could have taken a little bit longer break, but our cloning operations are still running. And because we are creating another virtual machine to host that clone, these operations do take a little longer. If we were just putting a clone on an existing server, it would really be just a few minutes to do that, because all we need to do is create some new disks using the block map of the snapshot, and then recover the database from those disks at the clone side. So it really does go pretty quick. Even if you have a multi-terabyte database, it just doesn't take that long, because you're not moving terabytes of data in order to create that copy. Now, I ran through these exercises last night just to make sure everything was in good order. Let me see if I can find my clone operation.
We're just gonna blame Paul for not doing his required sacrifice to the demo gods.
Yeah.
Paul, it was your turn.
I was gonna sacrifice you, Harvey, but I was nice today.
Nice.
Yeah, so last night it took 18 minutes. The amount of clock time it takes can vary based on what else is going on the cluster, how fast your cluster is. So I would expect it to be actually a little faster. One of the things I noticed last night is the cluster seemed a little sluggish when I was running through the exercises, and it seems much snappier today. So I'm hoping that things actually will run faster today than they did when I was running through the exercises last night, but we'll see. One other thing that I'll point out, since we're talking about cloning here, if we go back to databases, you'll notice that we distinguish between source databases and clones. They are treated differently inside of NDB. So source database will always have a time machine, and Era will continuously create snapshots and log backups in the case of SQL Server, depending on the SLA and schedule that's been chosen. Clones are separate from that, right? So clones won't have a time machine, but it preserves that relationship between it and the source database. And so that makes the refresh process super simple, as you'll see. Now, one of the things you can do is you can change a clone into a source database. So one of the things we could do if we wanted my clone from yesterday, if I wanted to turn that into a source database, I could just select it, click on delete, and unregister the database, but not delete it. And then that would leave it intact. And then I could go and register that database as a source database. Right? So that's one way that you can convert your clone into a source database, and then you can define a time machine and use it from that point forward. One of the interesting use cases for NDB is to be able to upgrade or replatform a SQL 2008 database, an older version, to a newer version. And we've got a video actually that highlights that. And we take advantage of this capability in that video. And so essentially, just to give you a high level play-by-play on what it's doing, you would register your 2008 database within Era, and then you would deploy a new VM without a database with the new version of SQL Server. So in this case, it was 2019. And then we'd clone our 2008 database into that 2019 VM. And so that gives you the opportunity to perform whatever testing you need to do as part of that migration effort. And really, those types of operations, the hard part is the testing, just making sure your applications are still going to work after you go from the older version to the newer version. And you can continually refresh that clone. So if there were some schema changes that were made after the initial clone was created, very easy to refresh it. And then when it comes time to cut over, you go into your 2008 VM. And basically you want to turn off writes to that database. Easiest way to do that is to make the database read-only, take a final snapshot, just that same manual snapshot workflow that we went through. Once that snapshot has been created, you refresh your clone on the 2019 VM from that snapshot. And then you would go into your 2019 instance and make the database writable and point all your applications to it. And then because it's still a clone at that point, you would go and remove it as a clone and then add it as a source database. And now your database has been completely migrated to SQL Server 2019. And you've got that great time machine within NDB for your new version of SQL Server. So there's a YouTube video that kind of goes through all the steps for that. It's pretty cool.
I just want to mention, Mike, for the Oracle side of the house, you can do a 12 to 19C full version upgrade all within NDB. As long as you have a software profile available for that database to be upgraded to, you can do that all within this same interface. And not to let any cats out of the bag, but with version 2.5 that's coming out later this summer, you will be able to do an OS upgrade for Linux-based systems as well as the software, as the database software. So you'll be able to do the OS as well for that.
Awesome. All right, looks like we've got one clone done. Seems like the clone I created is lagging for some reason. Are you a user 6, Brian?
Yeah, that's me. It's funny, I started mine 2 seconds after yours too on the start time.
Yeah, that is funny.
Somebody made their required sacrifice and somebody did not.
Yeah. Yeah, that is interesting that your create operation ran in just under 11 minutes and mine's still running. Well, the great thing is that, you know, in this particular case, because we're in this lab exercise, we kind of need to use the results of this operation. But in the real world, a lot of times, all you're doing is you're creating a clone. And whether it takes 10 minutes, a half hour, or an hour really doesn't matter too much, because you're able to go continue with another task. And the person that wants this clone is still going to get it way faster than you would typically get in a more traditional workflow. So it's always tough when you're waiting for something to complete, but the reality is you don't have to. Well, the good news is I believe this first step is the lion's share of the time. So once we get past this first step, it should wrap up pretty quickly. And maybe for the sake of time, I think I can use I'll just use the other clone that I've created rather than waiting for this to finish. I'm going to switch over to use my user 20 clone. But you know what we want to do now is go in and delete that table from our clone. And so we're going to remote desktop into that VM. I'm going to switch over to my user 20 clone. And if I click on it from the operation tab, that'll bring me to the database screen where I've got all the information, and there's my IP address right there. So I'm going to remote desktop into this VM. And then I'm going to log in as the local administrator. And this is an area, this is where the lab guide is wrong. It says to use Nutanix /for you with a lowercase n, but it should be an uppercase n. Oh, it does need to be spelled right though. There we go. That should work better. I just say, don't ask me, and click yes. All right. So this is what the clone looks like. And, it's firing up Server Manager. You can change that behavior if you want. I'm just going to close it. Now, one of the things you notice here is that we don't have a SQL Server Management Studio icon on the desktop. And that's because when we create that clone to a new VM, we actually are cloning the source VM and sysprepping it. And that icon is on the desktop of the local administrator. And so that gets wiped out during the sysprep process. So if you want icons to stick around on the desktop, what you want to do is put them in the public desktop, and then they'll stick around. Sysprep won't wipe that out. So to call up SQL Server Management Studio, we need to click on the Start menu and expand SQL Server Tools 18 and select SQL Server Management Studio. Again, we get to wait for it to come up. All right, we'll just connect. I think typically, if I remember, when you first go into the clone, you'll have the server name there. You can go ahead and connect with that, or you can replace the server name with a dot like I've done here. We'll click connect. And now when I expand databases, we see our clone database, right? Because we renamed it during the cloning workflow. And if I expand tables, we see our test lab table. That's that new table we created in our source VM before we created that snapshot. So what we're going to do is just delete this table. So just right click on it, select delete, and click OK. And so now that table is gone. And what we're going to do is we're going to refresh this clone from the same snapshot and see that that table will get restored again. So one of the things that I always like to express talking about refreshing a clone is that you can pick any point in time, and it can be a newer point in time or an older point in time than the clone was created from. And so we're going to basically reset this clone back to the same snapshot we used to create it. So we'll minimize the RDP session, and then we're going to go to back to clones here. It looks like it's still working on my old clone for some reason. But what we're going to do is just select the clone we're working with here and click the refresh button. And so this gives us a view of the time machine for the source database. And so we should have two snapshots available, one created by the SLA and the other that we created manually. So I'm going to choose, here's the other thing. For today, I don't have any snapshots. So by default, it goes in and shows you today. But I created this clone yesterday, so that's where all the snapshots are. So I just go back a day in this control here. And now when I drop down the snapshot, here's my first snapshot, that manual snapshot that I created. Got the API equivalent button here in this operation as well. And I'll click refresh. And so the process of refreshing your clone is really, really simple. Pick a new point in time, click refresh. That's really all there is to it. We've already established the relationship between it. Any pre and post commands that you defined while creating the clone in the first place, those get run again when you refresh as well. So now we can go ahead and click on the operation here and follow it along. And it looks like my clone operation failed. Oh, that's interesting. I must have fat fingered something when I was creating that clone. Well, fortunately, I've got another clone to use, so we can keep on moving.
Hey,
That's
hey
never
Brian, I think you have to take over the demo now.
I don't know about that.
But this refresh is going to go way faster than creating the clone in the first place, because all we're doing, presenting some new disks to the clone VM and replacing the existing clone database with a new database from those disks, and then we're cleaning everything up. We'll get rid of the disks that were hosting the old version of that clone. And so it's just going to take a few minutes to actually refresh this clone. And it looks like Ryan and I are in a dead heat right now. We'll see who finishes first. Oh, looks like I
Nudged it out. You wanted us to delete that database in that clone, right? So I right-clicked and deleted that one. Was that correct? That test table?
Yeah, the table you're supposed to delete. Yep.
Okay, I did. All right, good.
Yep, you did the right thing. So now we want to go back into our remote desktop session. And so we can see in SQL Server Management Studio, we're still connected. We still don't see that new table, but we just have to refresh the list. You know, SQL Server Management Studio has a list of objects that it pulls all this data from, and it periodically refreshes. But whenever you do something outside of SQL Server Management Studio, pretty normal to have to go in and refresh right away. And so after the refresh, we can see that our new table is, or that table we deleted is back, because it's part of that snapshot that we use to create the clone, and then we refresh from that same snapshot. All right, so let's
So non-DB question here. I'm a non-DBA guy in the networking one. How hard was this to do without this tool? Like this, of course, to me seems so simple. How hard was this to do without Nutanix and NDB?
So there's kind of two parts of it. Really, the way clones are created without NDB is to use backups and restores. And so, you know, it takes, you know, if we wanted to create an on-demand backup to create a copy, it takes time to create that backup. It's not technically difficult, but if this were a multi-terabyte database, I'd be waiting for an hour for that backup to complete. And then once the backup's complete, then I can go ahead and, you know, create a brand new virtual machine. That takes time to do that. And then I have to restore that database into that virtual machine. And because there's data movement involved with the native restore, that takes time as well. And then once you go in and delete the table, if I need to refresh, I got to perform that restore all over again. So there's just a lot of wait time involved. The process of creating a virtual machine to host the clone, that takes a little bit of time, right? I mean, if you don't have any sort of automation tools at all, you go into Prism, create a new virtual machine and load the Windows ISO and the VirtIO drivers. If you're using AHV, then you would install Windows, then you'd install, you know, load up the ISO for SQL Server, you install SQL Server, add any other tools, firewall rules. So, I mean, there's a lot of
Windows updates.
Yeah, Windows update. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
it's a time thing. I get it.
Yep.
Yes.
Thanks, Mike.
Yep. All right, so that's all there is from a cloning perspective. And so we're ready to go on to the next stage of actually deploying a database. And, you know, we're just kind of talking at a high level, the process of deploying a VM. And just think about the ISOs you need and the updates and going in and configuring firewall rules and adding SQL Server Management Studio, because that's not part of the standard SQL Server install anymore. There's a lot of steps involved, and it's easy to forget an option. And NDB just helps automate all that and helps ensure that it gets done in the right manner. And so to deploy it, we're just going to minimize this remote desktop session. We don't need it right now. And we're going to go back to our databases screen here and click on sources. And this is the place that we registered existing databases. So now we're going to create a new one. So we're going to go to provision, select SQL Server, and then database. Now we could provision an availability group if we wanted, but for the purposes of this lab exercise, we're just going to provision a standalone database. Now, it's pretty common to have SQL Server databases, multiples of them on the same instance. And so you do have the ability to provision just the database on an existing instance. So this VM that we've got registered, we could provision a new database to that instance. But in this case, we're going to create a brand new virtual machine that'll have Windows in it, the operating system or the database software, plus all those configurations that we've set up and defined. So we'll give it a database server VM name here. We're going to tag it with our user. We're going to call it MS-SQL2. This is a single cluster environment, but if we were going to be provisioning a database on a different cluster, we would pick it here in this dropdown. We're going to use the software profile that we created earlier. So we're going to choose the profile for your user. We're going to choose a compute profile. We'll use custom extra small. We'll choose our same primary network profile. And we're going to go ahead and join this to a domain. And we'll choose the Nutanix Lab domain profile. So this profile will have the credentials necessary to add this new VM to our domain. We'll give it a local administrator password. We'll use the Nutanix/for-you with a capital N, except I recommend spelling it correctly. All right. Now it's asking us to define the Era worker service account. And there are 3 different sets of credentials in the domain profile. There's the credentials used to add VMs to the domain. Then there's the SQL Server service account, and then the Era worker service account. And if you define the SQL Server service account or the Era worker service account in the profile, you don't get prompted during provisioning. But if you don't make that part of your profile, you will. So in this case, the Era worker service account is not part of the profile, so we have to enter it here. And this would be used in environments where every database server has its own service account. So I'm helping another big customer of ours, and that's how they're going to be provisioning new database servers. Every new server gets its own service account. So we'll just use the administrator account in this particular case. So we'll just specify it, nutanixlab.local/administrator. And then use the administrator password, which is Nutanix/for-you with the lowercase n. Looks like my fingers did the right thing that time. We'll choose a parameter profile for the instance. And so if we just hover over it, we can see what's in this particular parameter profile, memory settings, whether or not it's a contained database. These are parameter profiles that you can set up and configure for your environment. We're just going to use the default here. You also can use mixed authentication. So in the lab environments, I'm almost always using mixed authentication because I like having the ability to connect as SA because there are multiple domain involved in our lab environment. But in a production environment, Windows authentication is pretty common, so I'll just leave it at that. We'll go ahead and click Next. Here we have that same choice, put the database in its own time machine or use a group. We're going to leave it in its own time machine. We're going to tag it with our user number, and then we're just going to call this Fiesta. We'll use the default size of 200 gig, but based on that size, as well as the compute profile, we'll determine the right number of vDisks to use, as well as the right number of files. We also have a parameter profile for the database itself. This is separate from the instance. And it's just 2 things right now, whether or not the database is writable and what the access mode is. And most of the time for SQL Server, you want a writable database with the access mode set to multi-user. So most customers don't have to create an additional database parameter profile, but you can. And you also can adjust the collation. I think I might have forgot to point that out on the VM screen, but you can have the collation be different for the database than the instance itself. We also have the same pre and post commands. So we can further customize this database so that it's ready to go once the provisioning operation is complete. And we also have this feature here where we can build the database from a SQL Server backup. And so this is one strategy you could use as part of migrating workloads onto the NDB platform. We'll go ahead and click Next here. Here's where we configure the time machine. We're going to actually choose the bronze SLA. And if we hover over the info dot, we can see 7 days of continuous, 30 days of daily, and so on. And more options are open now in terms of the schedule. So not only can we adjust the daily snapshot time and the number of snapshots in the day, but now we can adjust the log catch-up time. And this is analogous to log backup frequency. So if you're managing a SQL Server database and you're backing up the log every 30 minutes, you would set log catch-up in NDB to every 30 minutes, and you'll get that same behavior. And then you can also choose what day of the week to create your weekly snapshot and what day of the month to create your monthly snapshot. And then once you're done, just click provision. So if I click on the operation, we can see that we've submitted the operation, and we can see the various steps involved. We create a VM, we register it, we provision the database, apply best practices, and then register that database. And we could follow along here. And in past iterations of this workshop, that's actually what I've done. And I had an attendee ask me, she said, do we have to wait for these operations to finish before we can do something else? And the answer is absolutely not, right? You can submit this operation and continue with another task. And in fact, that's what we're going to do. We're going to continue with another task, and we're going to move on to the patching exercise while this is running. So the one thing I was going to have you have us do together before we got going was to download that patch file, because there's a mistake in the lab guide. And so we're going to do that right now. And inside your VDI session, just right click on the Google Chrome icon and just select Google Chrome. And that'll just open a brand new browser. And in the lab guide at the top, there is a link that will take us to the Microsoft page with the patch file we want to use. And this is what you'd use in a production scenario, right? Microsoft would release a new cumulative update, and you'd have to go to their website to go get it. And I'll go ahead and patch. If we look at the lab guide, it's this link right here. That's what I pasted into my browser window. Oops. I just put the wrong window up on my other monitor here. Stand by. Okay. I've got a dual monitor set up, and I've got my big monitor on top of the one I'm sharing. And so that's why I'm looking up all the time, in case you notice me doing that.
I do the same.
I've seen myself in the video, and sometimes it looks strange, and I'm always looking up, but that's why, as I'm looking at other screens here. But we're just going to go ahead and click on the download button. And so this will download the cumulative update file. And you just have to do this once. It's going to put it in our downloads directory, unless your browser is configured to put downloaded files in another location. But in our VDI session, that's where it should put it. Won't take too long, just a few minutes to actually download that file. It goes pretty quick. And we're going to use this file to create a new version of the software profile. So during the provisioning operation, we use the software profile that we created using our source VM that was already installed and running on the Nutanix cluster. And so we're going to create a new version of that profile using this patch. It looks like I've got a couple minutes left here to download. It's funny, when I was running through these exercises last night, it seemed to go really quick, but now that I'm waiting for it to finish, it's going longer. But
that's how it always works.
Exactly. Seems like the progress is moving, but the time isn't moving much. But oh, it says minute left. I used to do this all the time as a DBA, downloading patch files. Microsoft used to release service packs in addition to cumulative updates, but they've kind of retired that strategy of service packs. and just do cumulative updates now. The patching mechanism that we're going to be using here, that works with service pack files as well. So if you're with older versions of SQL Server and want to use this method for service packs, you can do that. Yeah, the database provisioning, I see your message there, Graham, just saying that the provisioning operation is still at 5%. That is an operation that does take longer. It takes about a half hour to do the provisioning. And so that's why we're kind of shifting gears and moving on to the patching exercise. But I think that's one of the cool things about it is it just makes you more efficient because you spend a few minutes configuring the operation and NDB does all the heavy lifting for you. So you don't have to spend a half hour of your time getting that database provisioned. And we're on the home stretch of the download here for the patch file. All right, just doing a little validation and it's done. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and close this browser completely. Now we're back to our Era interface here. And Graham, you can see that the provisioning operation I submitted, it's at 5% as well. So that's pretty normal at this point in the process. So now that we have our file, we can go ahead and create a new profile version. So we want to go to the profiles menu here, and we're already on software. And what we're going to do is click on our software profile. And you see we have a create button here, and this is how we create a new profile version. And so we'll give it a name, we'll tag it with our user and call it SQL 2016 SP1-CU15. And then if we had a central repository with all these cumulative update files, we could just point it at the file share and it can grab the file from there. In this case, we're just going to upload it from our computer. We'll just go to our downloads directory, and here's our cumulative update file that we just downloaded. So we'll just click open. Now, we actually validate this file when you upload it. So if you upload a file, a cumulative update for Service Pack 2, for example, it will flag it during this process. And if it's not a real file, cumulative update file, we'll look at it and throw it out as well. And so I actually did that by accident. I've got a lot of cumulative update files on my laptop. And while I was going through some testing, I inadvertently uploaded the wrong file. And I love that we caught that here instead of me creating the version and then go through the process of applying the patch and have it fail there. So all we have to do now is just click create. And this is the last time you'll have to touch that cumulative update file, right? So you don't, if you think about what the process is like to patch SQL Server, is you have to grab that file, you have to get it to the database server VM, and then you would remote desktop into it and run that file to apply that patch. And you'll see it's much easier with NDB. Now we can go ahead and click on the operation here and follow along with it. It's just going to take a few minutes to actually create this version. And part of what we're doing, we are validating that patch file, make sure it's appropriate for the profile. And then once this version is available, that's the mechanism that we use to apply this patch to other VMs that are being managed by Era. And in that watch pot never boils type of way, this feels like it's taking forever, but it's really not. Minute and 23 seconds, that didn't take too long. We've got that new version created. Now, if we go back to our profiles and take a look at my software profile, you can see we've got two versions now. We've got the original version as well as a new version with Cumulative Update 15. If we look in status, we see that they're both unpublished. And so one of the things we've got built into NDB is role-based access control. And so that allows you fine-grained permissions that you can assign to, say, developers. So developers could create their own copies, or you could have some people be able to apply patches, but not provision new environments. And when a particular entity is not published, it's not visible to any other users. Now, we're admins, we're the admin in NDB, so we automatically see everything, whether it's published or not. But if I were an admin user, let's say we created a user called Mike, and I was a super admin in NDB, I wouldn't be able to see this new profile version until it's been published. And so fortunately, it's super easy to publish it. We just select the version, click update. We'll select published. We just confirm that we understand the implications of publishing. We click next. If we want to add some notes, we could do that, and we click update. Now, this is really just a metadata operation, so it doesn't submit an operation in the same way that creating the profile version did. So you can see it's already updated and set to published, so there's nothing more to do. So now let's go ahead and patch our source VM. Now, keep in mind that source VM was created outside of NDB, right? So we're able to patch SQL Server for VMs not created by NDB. So it works for VMs created by Era as well as existing VMs that have been registered with Era. So if we go and look at our database server VMs and click on the list, we can see all of our VMs, and I'm going to select the source VM. Now, before we do that, I want to go into that source VM and take a look at the version. So this is our source VM, and here's the version number right here. It's 13.0.4001.0. Now, that's not very informative. One other thing we can do is there's a set of system variables that we can access to get a more human readable version. So if I select add version here, we can see, and I can just copy and paste this into this window up here just to make it a little easier to read. We can see that we are running SQL Server 2016 SP1, and because there's no cumulative update listed as well, we know that's the base version. And then we also see the version number listed here. And so we'll apply the patch and go look at the version number after the patch is complete. So I'll minimize that remote desktop session. We've got our server. We're going to click on our server. And in the right-hand corner here, we've got a software profile version pane. And you see that there's now an update available. So all we have to do is click on the update button. And because this is an existing VM, we have to tie it to a software profile. And if I click on this drop-down list, it'll show us the ones that are eligible for this VM. So I'm going to choose my software profile for 2016. And here's my version. So we could have multiple versions here too. So over time, after 15 is loaded, you probably want to do it for 16 and then for 17, assuming there is one for Service Pack 1. You'll have multiple versions available potentially, and you can choose any of them. And that's handy in those scenarios where this is a database for a purchased application. And sometimes purchased applications don't work with the latest and greatest cumulative update. So this allows you to stay patched as current as is allowed by your application. And so we'll just use the latest and greatest. That's typically what you're going to do. Now, we can have it update immediately, which is what we're going to do in this case. But I just wanted to highlight that you have the ability to schedule this patch. So if this were a production system, we probably don't want to just go and patch the production database at 1:34 Eastern on a Friday. Right? We probably want to do it outside of normal business hours. And so this would allow us to schedule the patch to happen this Saturday during our regular maintenance window. I'll go ahead and say, let's say 9:30 is a great time. And because I'm a DBA, I've got to actually set the seconds to 0, even though that's probably not that important. And now we've determined, or we've told NDB to patch this database during our maintenance window. I can go ahead and then we have to enter the name of the VM. We can type it in, or we can do this trick here where I just copy it. And we can just paste it. And this is just an "are you sure" type of mechanism, right? We don't use this entry for anything other than that. Now, before I forget, I'm going to switch it back to patch it immediately. Note that the API equivalent button is there. I'm going to talk about that in a second, but not a lot of clicks. And we just go ahead and click update, right? Very easy. I didn't have to push the cumulative update file to the VM. I didn't have to log into the VM and run the patch file. I also didn't have to back everything up before I applied the patch. NDB is going to do that for you. So we help reduce the risk of patching by not only giving you the ability to patch in a clone and test it, but when we apply the patch, we snap the entire virtual machine before applying that patch file. So if something goes wrong applying the patch, we automatically roll back. So we get your database back to a known good state in case something goes wrong. In the context of SQL Server, another thing I always like to mention is that it is availability group aware from a patching perspective. So it's smart enough to patch your secondaries first before failing over and then patching the former primary. And you can control that behavior as well. You can have NDB fail over to your asynchronous replica if you like. You can have it proactively fail over to your synchronous replica. You can have it fail back after the patch has been applied, or you can leave it after the failover, so you just have it fail over once. You just have that type of flexibility. So if we go ahead and click on this operation, we can watch that operation in progress. It's already been running for a minute or so, and you can see that we do snapshot that VM, and we're currently in the process of running that patch file. Now, I mentioned that API equivalent button was there. If you're a DBA in an environment where you have lots of databases, which is pretty common, and really we're talking about instances when we talk about the patching process, because you don't patch individual databases, it's the entire instance. Even that the small number of clicks that we went through to apply the patch starts to get tedious when you start to have 10, 20, 30, 50 VMs that you have to patch. That's where that API equivalent button can be really handy, because now you have the ability through a single script, a single motion, schedule the patching for all of your production VMs during the maintenance window. Makes it much easier to stay caught up on your patching. And I talked to a customer not that long ago. That was the sole reason they wanted to buy NDB, because they were struggling with having to come in every weekend to apply patches to all of their database VMs. Now they're using NDB to patch their database VMs, and the weekend activity is much reduced. Before the weekend, they just schedule all the patching activities, and all the DBAs need to do is just validate. They don't have to actually go in and do any work to apply the patch. Saves them a lot of time. And we also have the same patching capability for Oracle as well. We've got customers that have been using it to save themselves a lot of time in complex Oracle environments. We've got a customer using it. It was a 2-node Oracle rack cluster. It had many databases in that rack cluster, and it would take a team of, I believe it was 4 of them all weekend to get that database patched. They put in NDB, and in less than an hour, one person can take care of the whole patching operation. So not only did it save a lot of labor, but also saved a lot of application downtime. Now this patching operation should only take, 5-10 minutes or so. Always seems to take longer when you're waiting for it to complete. And while this patching operation is running, you can see the provisioning operation that we scheduled is just humming right along. It's been running for 20 minutes or so now. And if we go look at our databases, look at our source databases, here's my Fiesta database that I provisioned yesterday using that same provisioning workflow. Now you'll notice for my source database, I've got a red dot here. And that's just because it's in the middle of patching that database and it is not accessible right now. Once the patching operation is complete, that red dot will go back to green. Now, if I take a look at my Fiesta database here, we can navigate to the time machine and we can see the results of that bronze SLA that we assigned to the Fiesta database when we provisioned it. We can see we've got this continuous green bar, and that means we can recover to any point in time down to the second if we were to restore this database or to create a clone. If we go to yesterday, we can see that the green bar starts around 7 o'clock. That's a different time zone than what I'm in. I wasn't testing it quite that late, but the reason it starts here is that's when the database was born, essentially. But you can see that color-coded counter view is starting to fill in as that SLA runs. And let me see if I can pull up another. I always like to show what a full time machine looks like. This is another cluster that I have access to. I haven't checked to see if it's up and running or there's some other issues, so I'm kind of running with scissors here. But here's a demo database. It's about 1 terabyte in size, and this is a more complete time machine, so you can kind of get a feel for what it looks like after it's been running for a while. Now I'm using that same bronze SLA, 7 days of continuous, 30 days of daily, and so on. This is what it looks like after it's been running for a while. I've got 7 green days followed by 30 blue days. And then I've got my weekly snapshot on Mondays represented by these purple squares. And then the monthly on the first of the month, that's these green squares. And then you can see a few manual snapshots that I've created while I was using this database. But this is what a full-time machine looks like. And unfortunately, there's not really a good way to create this in such a short time frame during a workshop. But I think this does a much better job of giving you the idea of what your recovery and cloning mechanisms might be able to leverage. And I'm also creating multiple snapshots a day, right? So I'm creating 6 snapshots a day. So every 4 hours, I've got a new snapshot. All right. So let's take a look at our patching operation. Our patching operation is complete. So we can see now that inside of NDB, we see that we are running cumulative update 15 here, but let's remote desktop into that VM so we can see what SQL Server thinks is the version that it's running. So I'll go into remote desktop here. It's .90. Nutanix for you, the capital N. So now I can just open up SQL Server Management Studio. There we go. Wait for it to start up again. All right, we'll go ahead and connect. And we can see that the version number is different. Still not very user-friendly, but you can see instead of 4001, it's 4574. We just go ahead and look at the version through that system variable. Well, you do have to type it, spell it correctly. we can see, I'll just bring this up again. We can see that we are running cumulative update 15 now. So it's not just NDB showing that we patched, SQL Server showed that it's been patched as well. All right. So that brings us to the end of the exercises that we've prepared in the lab guide. Our provisioning operation is still chugging along. We're getting in the home stretch here, 92% complete. But in these lab exercises, you've seen how to register your existing databases, create a software profile that can be used to create new environments, leverage the time machine to create on-demand snapshots. We've leveraged the copy data management features. We created a clone into a brand new virtual machine and refreshed that clone. Saw just how fast that refresh process is, how easy it is. And then we've also helped protect ourselves from a security incident by applying patches. And you saw how easy it was. Very easy to patch SQL Server. You combine that with automation, and now you can really save yourself a ton of time and protect yourself from a security incident. So with that, it looks like my provisioning operation actually completed. How about that for multitasking? Not only did we provision a new database, but we also patched a different one, right? Just another way for you to see how you can become a lot more efficient when you have a tool like NDB to help you manage your databases. And we can go ahead and look at our databases here, check out the sources. Here's my Fiesta database right there. We can even go into Prism Element. It's timed out, so I have to log back in. But if I take a look at my virtual machines, look at the list, there's a lot of VMs here. Here's another trick that you may, hopefully you know about it, but if you don't, you can type in partial names and it will filter the list for you. I'm user 19, so I can go ahead and type in user 19. Here's my source VM that we use to register. Here's the new VM that was created during the provisioning operation. If I look at user 20, now you remember my cloning operation failed for user 19, but in user 20, I've got a lot more virtual machines available. Here's my clone VM from the successful cloning operation that I did last night. And then Todd used that same user to perform some Oracle operations. So we've got some Oracle VMs here as well. And so with that, hopefully you've enjoyed seeing how NDB can help streamline database operations. I'll throw the floor open for questions. Any questions that you have going through the lab guide? Really anything.
Quiet group.
Wow, I must have answered absolutely everything, huh?
Can you chat about vMotion?
I can. Could you give me a little more context about what you're looking for? We certainly can vMotion virtual machines that have been created by NDB. It's connecting to the virtual machine through the IP address and that error worker, so it doesn't care what host it's on. So if you move it to another host, NDB doesn't have any issues with that. Or if you're asking just about vMotion in general, certainly supported with databases. Is there constraints for vMotion? There's not any constraints from an NDB perspective. If you think about what vMotion is doing, it's got a synchronized memory to be able to seamlessly move a virtual machine hot. And the more memory your virtual machine has, the more difficult that is. And the newer versions of ESXi do a pretty good job of giving you the ability to have more networking to facilitate vMotion of large VMs. But it does work better with smaller VMs than large ones. So I will say it that way. Harvey, I don't know if you've got any other field experience or stories about vMotion.
No, I mean, basically the same as what you're bringing up. Bigger VMs take longer, which I mean, I think we all get. Beyond that, neither Nutanix or Nutanix NDB has a problem with caring about what host your VM or your databases are on. So no issues there with constraints. Beyond that, I mean, there's a lot more that we could get into around migrating machines in Nutanix, especially in AHV, or moving from one cluster to another. There's a whole lot more to get into on that, but that's outside of what we were talking about today. I just don't know if it's outside of what you're asking.
Yeah, and there are some brief pauses associated with vMotion. I have heard some stories. If you were to have, say, a failover cluster instance and you vMotion the primary or the active node of that cluster, sometimes that can trigger a failover. A lot of times when you have those HA configurations already set up, you could consider not using vMotion and just let it fail over and move the virtual machine over cold, if you will. I've talked to some customers that actually set it up that way. They make it so when they have a maintenance operation, it just takes the VM down, and then the availability group automatically fails over to a replica on another VM. Yeah, you can make it so that the VM will just go down and not get vMotion during maintenance.
Very good.
Any other questions, comments, amusing anecdotes? Hopefully this was helpful. This is just a small short taste as to what you can do with NDB, and we focused on SQL Server. We support other databases: Oracle, Postgres, MySQL, MongoDB. This simplicity that you saw, the efficiency that you saw, it works with those as well. So even though we kind of showed you everything with SQL Server, it works great with Oracle and the other engines as well. And don't forget about the REST API. I always like to harp on the automation angle, because I think that's a really important part about managing databases, and especially if you have application teams that have developed that DevOps style of application development. You've got those CI/CD pipelines that often need automated access to databases. This is a great way to fold that in.
I stuck a note out there in the chat for everybody. You'll be getting a post-workshop survey from Samantha, who's in our marketing department. So just be on the lookout for that, and please, put some feedback in there so that we can make things better, or know that we're doing great. So we appreciate any feedback you can give us. We do pay attention to it, and we will take your suggestions seriously.
Absolutely.
It's up for you, Paul. It's up for you.
Bronco, dude. I don't know about you.
Tough crowd.
Let's give away a Ferrari or something next.
Not just a Bronco.
Hey, I'll take it.
Great job, Mike.
Thank you.
Yeah, great job, team.
All right, if there's no other questions, I think we could probably wrap things up a few minutes early.
Like we're headed in that direction.
All right. Well, thanks again, everyone, for the time. Really appreciate it. If you want to find out more about NDB, you can always reach out to Harvey or your Nutanix account team, and we'd be happy to have more conversations.
Absolutely. Thanks, team. Happy Friday. Have a wonderful weekend, and we will catch you on the next one. Again, we do one of these every month. It's not always NDB that we'll get into, but we'll get into it again. So definitely invite all of you out to check us out on our monthly Nutanix workshop.
Cool. All right. Appreciate it, guys.
All right, thanks, guys.
Bye.
All right, take care.
All right, take care.